I think Islam hates us.
They have done nothing except wreak havoc and terror for our faith and our religion.
When we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad.
Foundations of society are fragile. We must be the shepherds of our own civilization.
If anyone answers either yes or no without making necessary distinctions, both are not telling the truth. They're lying.
Father, we pray that your word will become a hammer that breaks rocks into pieces. That you will raise up in this nation pulpits and prophets that will call the nation back to repentance.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently, or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah initiative, conversation without compromise.
My mom's family is from Iraq. About half the family, or well, not half, a small part of the family came shortly after World War I, like around the 1920s, 1930s, and they fled from Iraq after well, it's the 1930s when the Nazism that went to Europe gained a big traction also in Arab states, and like their friends there, they had Arab friends that said, flee for your life because soon you won't be able to. So they fled to what was then the mandate, the British Mandate of Palestine at the time, and the rest of their family, most of the family, came with the big emigration of escape of the Jews from Iraq. That happens around 1951, between 1949 to 1951, with the Farhud. I don't know if you know about it. It's like so the Farhud is an event that is, I would call it, like the Jews of Iraq call it kind of like their own little Holocaust. So that happens riding on the wave of anti-Semitic attacks in Europe after the Nazism, and then the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. The Arab states, there were a lot of what we call par'ot, which is like attacks of and massacres of Jews around the Arab world, and my English is not that perfect sometimes. Peaked, I guess, in the Farhud, which is an event of where a lot of Iraqi Jews were massacred and hanged in the streets, and the rest escaped. Luckily for me, my grandma, my mom's mom, escaped before that happened, but she left without anything. They had they had a house, they had possessions, and at that time the authorities there allowed Jews to leave if they leave everything behind. So they're just the clothes that they had on them. She arrived to Israel at the time, and my mom was born in Israel and worked her ass off, so I will have a better life, I guess, to call it this way. I was raised in Israel, and I was born near Holon, the outside of Tel Aviv, and then I moved to a moshav, which is a small Israeli village, I guess, called Givati. That's where I grew up mostly, served in the military, and then I started traveling and working around the world. The US was supposed to be a small venture, a short venture that turned into a very big venture eventually. And I opened a business here. And then at a certain point, I decided that school is important. I got a scholarship for the University of Washington. And well, I started in a community college in Seattle. And then I got a full ride to University of Washington. I did biomedical engineering as my undergrad, and then in Seattle, actually, I also got involved in I would call it Middle East peace advocacy. Anti-Israeli people will call it pro-Israel advocacy. Oh, anti-Palestine advocacy. It depends who you ask. I think that in the Northwest, you know, being from the Northwest as well, most people are very, I would call it liberal, or it tends to be very progressive, and so is the pro-Israeli advocacy groups. They've been, my experience with Stand With Us was the organization I was part of for a few years as part of their board in the Northwest. It was very pragmatic, very similar to the voice I wanted to give, which is negotiation, talk, building commonalities, and working towards a realistic solution that will not humiliate either of the sides and not cause insecurities, like hurt the security of any of the sides. That was my attempt. That was my goals. I was working in the University of Washington, where I met you, in booth, as you've seen, that we're trying to bring forward the idea that you can be both pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian at the same time. And then I got accepted to a PhD. I finished my bachelor. I got accepted to a PhD in the University of Chicago in the School for Molecular Engineering here. And I started my research. I've been doing it for a year here. Just passed my candidacy not long ago, which is why I had to postpone this interview.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And now, I don't know, 3 to 4 years more until my PhD.
Well, congratulations. Now you'll be Dr. Zvi.
Yeah, hopefully. We'll get there.
So I'm curious what your experience serving in the IDF was like. What did you do there? What's national service like? Because I think there's probably some assumptions about what that is or what that's not.
Yeah, definitely. So it really, I guess, depends also what family you come from. My specific family is very. My mom is wonderful, I think, in raising her kids, me, my twin sister, and my young brother, as critical and try to be objective as possible. So I was never being disposed. I guess I don't know if disposition. I've never been conditioned to like or being said, here you need to believe in this, here you need to believe in this. It was a very liberal view, I guess, of things. You can believe what you want, be critical and form your own opinion of whatever you want. So when I grew up, for me, serving the military was a very honorable thing to do, I guess. Also, the entire society is serving in Israel, so it's part of it's being, living in a state of constant threat. It's just part of your contribution, I guess, to the society you live in, to the society that protects you. So it's something that you feel obligated and also almost honored to do. Of course, you're also 17, 18, and then you grow up a little bit. I joined, I guess, let me see how I translate the name. It's called the Special Engineering and Demolition Forces of the Paratroopers. I think the paratroopers will probably be closest to Marines here. So I was a combatant. My service was, compared to some people that drafted the same time I am, was probably pretty intense, except the Lebanon War, where I was in a, I guess, let me see how I translated. Translate the name. It's called the Special Engineering and Demolition Forces of the Paratroopers. So I was a combatant. My service was, compared to some people that drafted the same time I am, was probably pretty intense, except the Lebanon War, where I was in a, commander course, so I was pushed aside, and I actually had very little interaction in the Lebanon War, which is probably the second Lebanon War, which is probably the most intense event that most soldiers had during my service. So that one I would, at the time I didn't feel this way, but now I would say a lot to avoid. But the other things that you see is you also get exposed to the sad reality of the conflict. And for me, it made me both passionate about, I would call it the case for Israel, but also passionate about trying to solve the solution, trying to solve the situation for the benefits of both sides. So I would say I grew up from that experience. I don't wish for anyone to have to go through an experience like that, although it's hard for me to regret it, because I feel in many ways I am who I am today because of experiences like that. And when I'm saying that, what I mean is that as an Israeli soldier, you face sad realities and conflicts that you don't have to face, let's say, if you grew up here in the US. And while it's not, it's a sad thing that that is reality, it's still something that helps you mature and grow up and understand that stuff are not black and white. Like for an example of like being shot at from a house that might have innocent people inside, and or going into into a house to try and arrest someone that is very dangerous, but on during that time you also interact with kids, and you know, you're going, it's just not a, you know that you're doing something very important, but it's not a pleasant situation. It's a, no one wants to do that. Who wants to see a you know, a family you know, terrified because of you? Also, no one wants to see someone look into you, you know, with eyes of murder, with murder in their eyes. It's just not a pleasant thing. And it's yeah, like there is a saying in Israel that every mom says to her kids, and that's, by the time you grow up, you won't have to serve in the military. My mom said it to me, her mom said it to her, and I will probably say to my kids one day, but unfortunately it's just never, it's never true. It's never true. Yeah, so I did. Go ahead.
So let's talk about how we got to this point, right?
Yeah,
So,
I'll guess. Go ahead.
Years ago, the Jewish people were a scattered diaspora living across the world. There was no state of Israel. What happened?
True. Okay, well, we're not starting 100 years ago. We're gonna have to start earlier. All right. Yeah, we're gonna have to start earlier, and it's not only that. Like, I guess I'll try and. So usually when I go to a person that is, let me start by going a little deeper to who I am. All right. I told you this before. I consider myself as a progressive person. I am, you know, in U.S. policies, probably I'm much closer to a progressive point of view than anything else. I'm for Medicare for all. I think that, by the way, Israel has a sort of a Medicare for all. It works wonderfully, or better, I guess, than here. And I think that the gap of inequalities here is just awful. I see the, I don't know if to define it systematic racism, but I see the racism in the society, and I appalled by it. You know, I think that there are some things that has to be, that the situation, the status quo that was created here is like a lot of areas of minorities or families in general have been born to a cycle of poverty because of a racist past that this country has an obligation to fix. But I also am, I guess, a strong supporter of the right of Israel to exist. And this is a really hard place to be in the US right now, because all the friends, most of the friends, I won't say all, but many of the friends that share my point of view in many of the US policies are also very strong they're very critically of the state of Israel. So usually it's I need to start the conversation a lot earlier, and I'll do it with you the same. All right, I'll try to take you through the journey, and one would, like in the middle, you should ask questions and say, and let's see if we can build a case together for the Jewish state. Okay.
Okay. So where are we starting here? So
All right.
Emperor Nero is assassinated. Vespasian goes to become Rome. Sends.
Well, I think I want to start actually with the definition, with defining some basics. So we need to define, in order to understand the conflict, I think that we need to define a few basic things, and the first thing of them is probably what does it mean to be indigenous people. Like, we need to define what Judaism is, and what do you think Judaism is?
What do I think Judaism is?
Yeah, what does being Jewish means?
Oh, wow. Okay. So there's a few definitions of it for me, right? So as a Christian, being Jewish, in one sense, means being descended from Jacob and his 12 sons, or having converted or married into that community, right?
Oh, okay. So that's an ethnic / people definition, right?
Right. Then also there's a religious definition, right? And that's where things get murky, right? So
right. Agree.
It's in the biblical perspective. Sometimes people get thrown off because it talks about Judaism in a way that's all into Judaic arguments, but saying these are true Jews, these are not true Jews, and the Bible considers somebody who's truly Jewish as somebody who's bought in heart and mind, more than the ethnicity itself. But it certainly has a place for the ethnicity and the culture as well. Aside from that,
right. So I would agree with both of those, actually, and I want to just put it as a basis here to understand where you stand, because sometimes I need to prove to people that Judaism is also ethnicity, is also a people. It's a people with a joint ancestry, and it's true that you can either marry or convert into the community, but you can say the same for Native Americans. You can say the same for any ethnic community around the world. You can join this community, whether what entails the part of joining this community. It's a fight I'm still fighting for as well, because some people think that you have to be a full Orthodox Jew for that, and I would completely disagree. But the point is that it's true that it's a religion, but it's first and foremost is a group of people, is an identity of a nation, right? Of I would call it not a nation, of a people, all right? Of some group with the origin, with the ancestry, right? Correct.
Right.
So now, do you think that, would you say that our Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel?
Yes, and no, and yes, and no.
So tell me why not.
So if you think about, so from a Christian perspective, right, actually, just from a believing the Bible perspective, it starts with the land being given to Abraham, and then the Israelites. So they're not initially indigenous, but they still inherit that land. Then after a certain amount of time, it just becomes inevitable that you're indigenous to the land. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So we come to the point of what does indigenous means, right? And that's where I actually thought that we should start. And that's a big problem. What does it mean to be indigenous to the land, right? And for me, and for many other, being indigenous to the land means that you are an original settler in the land, right? Now, an original is a very hard, because everything has a past, right? Like yeah, like everything has a past. But you're right. After a certain amount of time, but more important than that, I would say that you don't have any other homeland, right? So I would say that if the Romans came to Israel and lived there for 1,000 years, does not make them indigenous to the land, right? Because they have, would you agree? They have a place of origin where, like, that was Rome, right? Being Italian and living the land as an occupier for 1,000 years does not make you an indigenous to a certain land. The British Empire lived as controlled areas. We had military officers in areas for, I don't know, many, many years. Does not make them indigenous to any land.
So I think there's some nuance there, because I have some family members who'd be hit by this, not on my side actually, but Spanish living in the Philippines family members. And I'd say they're completely indigenous, because while they still keep many of their customs, they're now invested in the future of the country, not as an occupier, right? But as somebody who now is a partaker in the future of the collective people there.
So I would say that a person, that what they did is they almost converted into the local, right?
Right.
Which is also fine. Like there is a room for that, but as a collective, you cannot say that the Romans are indigenous to Israel. It just makes no sense.
Right.
Doesn't matter how long they live there.
If they're still seeing themselves as overlords of this kind of greater city a long way away.
If they still have belonging, like if these still belong to Rome, if they still define themselves as Roman, it's a big problem. But anyway, so let's go back to the beginning, I guess. I'm not. I told you that, and I need to tell it, I guess, to whoever is going to watch this. I'm not a religious person at all. I am a scientist, and I am a strong supporter of facts, and I'm a student of history too. I really like history, particularly like the history of the Jewish people. I guess I have a bias for that, and so my argument will not going to be religious, all right? And that's without disrespecting any religious argument for that. I'm not trying to disrespect it. I'm not trying to say it's obsolete. It's for me, from the way I believe, the way I justify the existence of my country is not, or my homeland, I will call it this way, is not on a religious basis. And what we know is that a kingdom, the kingdom of Judea, existed in the state, in what's today's state of Israel, until being conquered. I'm gonna skip a lot of other wars and shit. Sorry about that language. Until the Roman conquered it, right? Like probably started at around 1,000 BC, 1,200 maybe BC, and then continued through until being conquered by the Romans, and the Romans conquered half of the, like most of the known world at the time, I guess, or a lot of the known world at the time, and until what Christians will acknowledge as the big next thing, as the birth of Jesus, right? Which was born in Judea as a Jew to an occupied by Romans, right?
Right.
To a Roman colony, let's call it this way. Yep. Now, this alone, for me, builds this over 400 or 500 years in which Jews were an independent, self-governing entity in the land of Israel, justifies their indigenous origin. Also, building on the fact that they're continually lived there from then until today. There was always a Jewish presence in the land. But let's go to what happened next. So most of your audience, I imagine, know the story of Jesus Christ and everything that happened there. But regardless, after that, the this story shows about the tension that was between the Jewish population and the Roman occupiers.
Right.
And throughout history, Jews are very, very, very bad subjects, I guess. They don't like to be subjugated, and they rebelled often, and this whole conflict with the Romans get to a peak point at 130, something like 130 AC. That's after Jesus is dead, and that's with Bar Kokhba rebellions, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the story. And in these rebellions, the Jews rebel again. There is a whole getting defeated again because the Romans were too strong, and the Romans at that time decide to punish, and they slowly dwindled the Jewish population until a point where most of it, the overall majority, was just dispersed throughout the Roman Empire, because the Romans were very big believers of one, kind of like Alexander Mogdon, and like everyone a citizen of Rome, right? There's a one nation, one empire. So that's what happens with the Jews, and there we come to the biggest confusion that most Americans have when I talk to them, and that's the source of the name Palestine. Until that point, this area is called Judea, right? This is where, before the first Arab is even going anywhere near the state of Israel, the name Palestine starts, all right? Now, I'm going to this story not because I'm trying to diminish or hurt any Palestinian pride. I'm going to the story because the name Palestine is often used to say Jews are not indigenous to Israel, or to say that here Palestinians were here first, and that's mainly comes because people don't understand what Palestine means, where Palestinians come from. That the name is starting way before the first Arab ever arrived to the land of Israel. It's a Latin Hebrew actually word. The name, like for me, the word Palestine. Well, not only for me, the word Palestine comes from the word Philistine, right?
Right.
And that's Philistines are Greek people that came from the sea. That's all proven. It's proven in like archaeology, in many ways, by scripts from Egypt, by scripts from Assyria at the time. They're Greek people that came from probably Crete, through the sea. They tried to attack Egypt. They didn't really succeed because Egypt was a very strong power at the time, and there is debates if they were allowed or conquered the shores of Israel today, which is the areas of Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. I think that's like the 5 cities they had.
Yeah, the capital.
So those are the Pentapolis. You got it.
Yep,
So
yeah.
those are right. So those are Greek people. Has nothing to do with Palestinians today. When the Romans banish the Jews, or most of the Jews, from the land of Israel, they named the area in the Roman word for Philistine, which is Palestine. Well, Syria Palestinian, that's how they named the area. And they name it because that's their way to, one of the worst thing in Rome that you could do to a people or to a person is to erase them from history. They try to sever the connection of the Jewish people to the land, and they change the name, among others, by changing the name on the name of their arch nemesis from the Bible, which is the Philistines, right? Now, for me, for Israelis, and that's something that people have to understand. The word Philistine is a word for invader. That's what the word means in Hebrew. It comes from the word palash. We call them plishtim, which means invaders. And it's very hard for me, for my land to be called invasia. Like, this is basically how you're calling my land. You understand? And that's one of the reasons why, when Israel was established, Israelis at the time, or Jews that were living at the time, were named Palestinians as well. But they would never take the name Palestinian because that means invasion. So they changed the name. That does not mean that people that are called Palestinian today are more indigenous, or even like, in my perspective, the indigenous case is a very, very strong case for a Jewish state. And that's the reason why it was named Palestine before, and why it was changed to Israel. Not because some colonial force came and took it and renamed Israel. It's because an indigenous people liberated themselves and changed the name that was given by a colonial Roman force, by a colonial European force. The same happened in Afghanistan when they changed the name of Alexandria. You know, Alexander Mogdon named half the cities in the world Alexandria, because he's really likes himself, the guy. So Afghanistan, when after in a certain point they renamed, like they had like 4 or 5 Alexandrias, they renamed them to Arab names, or well, to Afghani name, at least to the original names.
They still have one, which is Kandahar.
Yeah, Egypt also have. Like, I'm not saying that they must, but think about it. If Egypt right now decides that Alexandria is a wound of colonial European occupation, and it is, and they want to change the name, who am I to tell them no? Alexandrians are the first people that live there. Like, it's a process that many people that liberates themselves do, and it's a process that Israel did as well. They just changed the name from Palestine because it's a humiliating name, you know, for an Israeli to have, because and it has nothing to do with Arabs. Like, it has to do with European colonialism, the first European, or the first massive European colonialism, let's call it, which is the Roman colonialism, right?
Right.
So that was important for me to like build to understand where are we standing now. To say that that Israel or indigenous to Israel is, for me, is like saying that Native Americans are indigenous to America, and the reason is, like, it's true that a lot of the population got forced out of the land, right? And it's true that after the Roman conquest came a Muslim conquest and an Islamic conquest that started with Muhammad at 600. Muhammad was born at 600 AC, right? More or less.
More 571, I think.
Yeah, his conquests are around the 600 AC. 600 AC. That's when, and I think the first Muslim occupation of Israel was around 700 or so, 750. I don't know, something like that. That's the first one, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's earlier than that. I think it'd be about, so I believe Muhammad dies in around 632, and then the conquest happens really in the late sort of in the sort of mid 600s. The first conquest comes under Caliph Omar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it'd be about 650, I think.
So, well, I think that anyway, the exact time is not matters. I think it was 700s, but it doesn't matter. The exact time is not important for the point, right? The point is that when Arabs that are named Arabs because they come from the Arab Peninsula, right?
Right.
So just like Jews are named Jews because they come from Judea, Arabs are named Arabs because they come from the Arab Peninsula. When they conquer the area, they conquer also Israel. That's the first conquest, and even then, these people are not the Palestinians today are not directly descendant. Those the Palestinians today are a much later conquest, let's say. So if you ask Palestinians, at least if you used to ask Palestinians, not today, but if you used to ask the Palestinians around the partition plan and later, if you would ask Sharif Hussein, or if you would ask the Palestinian envoy to the UN Commission, they would tell you that in their view, the first Palestinians were setting in the lands about 1,000 years ago, more or less. Now again, the exact timing does not really matters. It's just that it's highly important for me that everyone with the right mind should at least agree that Jews are indigenous to Israel. Whether Palestinians are indigenous to Israel or not, that's a case that I'm always willing to talk, because I believe that Palestinians today deserve a state. I believe in a two-state solution. I don't think that there is, in my eyes, a different realistic solution. I just don't think that the indigeneity case is the right case for me as a scientist. I cannot completely justify Palestinian indigeneity in Israel. I can justify a humanitarian and like a human solution to this situation that obligates a just and good solution for people that are humans. But it's hard for me. Like, I'm completely open, and if we ever have our actual talk with another Palestinian guy, I would completely open to hear their case for indigeneity in Israel. But it's just hard for me. Do you want to make the case?
So let's kind of bring it back to recent history.
Okay.
So I met a woman on the plane back from Dubai, and her grandfather fled for his life at the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
So in the beginning, not the end, but
in the beginning. Then he goes to Saudi Arabia, never receives citizenship from the government there.
Which is not okay.
Right. His son is born in Saudi Arabia, never receives citizenship there.
That's completely not okay.
Yeah, and then his granddaughter, who I met on the plane, is also born there, never receives any citizenship. Now, so her father and grandfather, a Palestinian, receive no welcome elsewhere.
Right.
And that's kind of the only national identity that even exists for them.
Right.
So do you consider her to be an indigenous Palestinian? What do you think of someone in that situation?
So again, indigenous, that's a hard case to make, but that's not the point for people like her. They are not responsible for the history of a people. They are innocent people that were born in a place and got displaced by a tragedy. And that tragedy, by the way, is when they got displaced, I don't know if she told you that, but the overall majority got displaced before the 1948 war, was displaced because their armies told them, leave here so we can massacre all the Jews and you can come back. And this is not, it's not a dispute. Like, this is something you can Google and find the papers saying it. You can find the quotes from the Arab leaders saying it, and you can ask many if I can Google, I can find many pro-Palestinian activists that are coming. They're saying, my mom left, or my grandpa left because the Egyptians and the Jordanians told them, leave and you can come back when Jewish blood is on the floor. Like, so it's very important to give the context here. They were displaced in a very, very defensive war, an unjust defensive war of a one-day-old country that was attacked by five Arab countries just because it wanted to exist. They didn't get displaced because Jews wanted to run off the whole country. And displaying it this way is a distortion of history. It is a very it's a criminal act against history, because that's not what happened. But she, like, for her grandpa, they don't need to bear the fault for that. And their situation is stressing, to my opinion, the need for a Palestinian state, because just like Jews around the world, Palestinians around the world today are mainly getting a second-class treatment by Arab states, which is appalling, and it's outrageous, and it's ridiculous that the UN is doing nothing about it. Just absolutely nothing. It's like all it does, it's creating resolution after Israel, and does nothing real to help Palestinians around their world. Today in Lebanon, there is a wall that is being built around the Palestinian refugee camps that close the camp. They're not closing the country around, they're closing the camp with a wall. Egypt today is building a wall on Gaza Strip, on the Gaza Strip. And I didn't see any one BDS activist against Egypt. I didn't see any one BDS activist against Lebanon. They are closing the border. They have been controlling it since 2005. They're closing the border and they're building a wall there. And they're not giving, Palestinians that used to be Egyptians their rights. Jordan has, I don't know if you know, but I don't even want to go into the history they had with Palestinians. But today, Jordan is 70% Palestinians, and Palestinians are still not first-class citizens there, which is ridiculous. Because a lot of it is because of colonial forces that decided to put a Hashemite king over 70% Palestinians, and the same they did with Syria when they put an Alawi king, an Alawi ruler over mostly Sunni population. This is those are grave mistakes, or I don't know even to call them mistakes. Maybe they were done purposefully by West countries that are a result of many of the conflicts in the Middle East today. And I've always been a big criticizer of the West for those reasons. So yeah, for you, going back to your questions, for her and for her grandpa, I think that she should be, that a Palestinian state should be exist, and they should be able to go into a Palestinian state. Now, if you ask me about Israel, we can go into a whole discussion about that. Maybe that's your next question.
Well, let's just rewind a tiny bit here, and let's get to the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948. But before that, let's talk about how big of a Jewish. So it's one of the ideas that people talk about, right, is you get a bunch of Europeans, you cordon off a bunch of land in the Middle East, and you put them down, and that is the beginning of the state of Israel.
I told you my heritage, right? Do I look European to you? I have nothing in my blood that is European. Maybe I'm a little pale, but that's my grandpa. My grandma is very dark. My Iraqi Jews are sometimes can be pale. My twin sister is dark and I pale. Whatever. But I'm Iraqi. I'm considered as a Middle Eastern. I'm not European. 60% of Israel today is Middle Eastern origin. 60%. That means that the most of the people, overwhelmingly most of the people of the Jewish population, because we're talking about Jewish origin now, have never left the Middle East. They're not, or at least have a much stronger connection to the Middle East than anywhere else. Now, even if we go to this Europe part, it's ridiculous to claim that this is a bunch of Europeans that come in. Like, we're talking about people that were forced to live in Europe. Just because it was for 2,000 years does not mean that like, because they suffered more, that does not mean that they deserve less. Like, I mean, they were forced. They never got accepted as first-class citizens in Europe. Europe never, like, I mean, Nazism was the embodiment of all of it, but it's not just Nazism. We're talking about like crusades, like later on, 1492, everyone are thinking that the biggest thing that happened is that Columbus landed in America. But for me, and it's the banishment of Spain, Spanish Jews barred from Spain, and they were dismissed all over again. And Jews were banished from many other parts of Europe throughout history, over and over and over again. So just because they were forced to live in a place that had a little less sun and marry to people that are not necessarily of Middle Eastern origin, and they lost their Middle Eastern complexity, does not make them European. Now, you can claim that they have now some European blood, but they are by definition and by origin are Jews. They're even genetically, they're much closer to me than they're close to, even after 2,000 years, they're much closer to me than they're close to many other non-Jewish European places, which is why when you take a genetic test, they can tell you you're Jewish Ashkenazi. They're not, you're Jewish European. They're not going to tell you you're French. right? And they can say it because there are even still genetic markers that show that. But even without genetics, like the claim that this is a part of that this is some European colonialism is simply wrong. And until this notion will go down from the Palestinian, education system, or from Palestinian activism in general, we will never have peace, because they will always see me as a colonizer from Europe, and I'm not. First of all, I'm not European. I'm an existing proof that that it's not a European colonialism. So it's really hard for a lot of them to debate me. But it's not only that. Even for European Jews, like Jews in the Gola, what we call diaspora, every year we used to say, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. They've never lost the attempt to go back to Israel. And while a lot of European, I don't know, whatever you would call them, European Jews, or Jews that were banned in Europe, have had to maybe were able to build themselves sometime better life until they discovered it's all an illusion. But even American Jews today, a lot of them do not understand the strong need in Israel. But I do, because my family were never a first-class citizen. Never. They never were able to accumulate wealth and be secure with that. They were, even every time they accumulate a little bit, it was taken away from them. And throughout history, in Arab countries, in Iraq, and everywhere, the Jews were, from time to time, let's massacre 200 of them. So for no apparent reason, just because they were Jews. So for me, for my family, the establishment of Israel was the re-establishment of Israel was a life-saving solution, straight like that. And calling it, European, a bunch of European being fenced back to Israel is ridiculous. It's distortion of history.
So let's talk a little bit about that persecution. So I think one thing that people miss on both sides here with Middle Eastern history is that they try and make it monolithic, right? So that sometimes people look at, Westerners will often look at the persecution of the Jews and Christians in the Middle East, and they'll say, okay, and they think it's a straight line from Muhammad to now of Jews and Christians being persecuted, and that's not the case. There's plenty of times when Jews and Christians have thrived.
100%.
But on the other side, you can also point back to these, wonderful, benevolent, intelligent, tolerant Muslim leaders, and then think it's a straight line from then to about 30 years ago. And that's also oversimplifying things as well.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
The persecution isn't something that's necessarily happening every year, but if it happens every 100 years
or 200 years or 100 years, is that enough? I mean, even if it happens every 100 years, that means that every grandchild ever is living his puberty or whatever through his grandpa getting hanged on a tree. Like it's not to say that my family always felt like they are second-class citizen will not be an understatement. Always felt this way. Even like when some of them were docked, because there are times, you're right, there are all of a sudden a different king comes or a different whatever comes, and prosperity happens, and they can be doctors and traders, because that's what Jews culture is, and then boom, it's been taken away again, or this illusion almost is being shattered again. But you're right, it's not a direct line. It's just something that I am telling you and the viewers to understand why Jews had the need to come back to their homeland, but it's almost obsolete of the case. Like they have a right also to go back to the homeland, just like Native Americans here has a right for the reservations, almost every other nation in other people have a right for sovereignty in their state, in their homeland, the Jewish people deserves it as well. And recognizing it is a key point. To say that's not to say that it has to come, or the extent that it comes on livelihood of Palestinians, of the collective that is called themselves Palestinians today, of the population that is here when Israelis are coming. So if we want to talk about that we can talk about who was here.
So let's then talk about leading up to 1948, right? You've got the Ottoman Empire, then the British Mandate of Palestine, and then how many Jews that made up the state of Israel were there before that British Mandate, and then how many came in the British Mandate?
So let's remember who's ruling during the British Mandate, before the British Mandate. It's the Ottoman Empire, right?
Right.
Which Jews could live, but in many times they had to be a second-class citizens. They had to pay many times the
jizya,
the name of it, and stuff like that. And there is obviously a big what happened during the Ottoman Empire occupation of Israel is that many of the land became owned by I don't know how the Ottomans used to call it, but I would call them Ottoman nobles or Ottoman military officers or whatever. So they owned the land, and that's actually hurt both Israelis and Palestinians, the local, because they're not Ottomans are not Arabs. Ottomans are Turks, right? They're Ottomans. They're not Arabs, and they come and they mostly own the land, but most of the population that comes is not, because it was a desert back then. It wasn't milk and honey like the Bible try to describe it. So it wasn't a very like I guess we can read the descriptions from 1917, and then everyone knows the Mark Twain description of the land, right? That is a desolated land in 1870 or something like that. In 85, I think there was like some kind of a envoy here that described the land mainly as desert, and I can give you. I can give you names if you want, but I don't know if that's the point. So most of the Ottoman did not live here. So the people that lived here was other citizens of the Ottoman Empire, which in majority were Arabs. The language that was controlling most of the land was Arab. But to say that the land was then even anywhere close to densely populated would be a complete lie. So I think the numbers are talking about probably a few thousands of Jews and a few tens of thousands of Arabs at the time in Israel, which changed a little bit during the British Mandate, because the Ottoman Empire fought with the Germans against the West and lost, and the Ottoman Empire breaks down. At that point, most the Brits gets the mandate, right? On so France and Britain and the rest of them gets all kind of places around the Middle East and everything. And the British mandate includes both Israel and the Palestinian Authority of today and Jordan, right? That's the British mandate of Assyria Palestina, or Palestine. The Roman name that was given to the land, again, has nothing to do with the native population, which means all the Jews in the land at the moment, for Europe, for the British eyes, which I don't really care about the British eyes, they have nothing to do there. But for the British eye, for the British eyes, they I'm sorry, but for the British eyes,
it's fine.
The British at the time, all right, has in their eyes, Jews, non-Jews, whatever it is you are, if you are in the area, you're called Palestinian, right? And that's where modern Palestine gets into, like, burned into modern notion, because because now it's also the West is dealing with it, and Britain, like every other Western country in the area, wants oil. They want to ship oil there, so they get the mandate of the area, and the mandate supposedly by establishing and they get the mandate until the indigenous population of the area is able to govern itself. At that time, even the Brits admits that that homeland is the Jewish homeland. I know that there are, I don't know if we should go into the letters that were sent to Husseini and the Balfour Declaration. I don't know. The point is, even if there is a claim there, like whether or not there is a claim for a Palestinian population in the area at the time, at the mandate, I'm not talking about the partition plan yet, but at the time, even whether there is or not is irrelevant to the fact that there is no doubt that there has to be a Jewish population there. Like when they get the mandate, both the UN and Britain know, and it's in numerous sources, that there is a Jewish homeland there. So again, I don't really recognize the authority of the Brits to decide who has the land there or not, but because it's ridiculous to me. They come as a conqueror as well, but it's well known, I guess, that a Jewish state needs to exist there. That's before the Holocaust, way before the Holocaust, way before anything else happens. That's just because Jews around the world were longing for their homeland that was occupied by different empires throughout history, and right now it's getting a mandate by Britain. So hey, let's see, maybe the mandates, maybe the Brits will let us have our homeland back, because we cannot go to the Ottoman and ask nicely. They didn't care. So then the Zionist movement started. They started before, actually. It started in the late 1880s, but it gained very strong traction after World War One, when the British Empire was ruling Israel. So Jewish immigration starts, right? Jewish immigration to the land starts, and Arab immigration to the land starts. At that time, Arab immigration is never restricted. Jewish immigration is strongly restricted. And the reason for that is because the Brits wants the help of the Arab, they have resources, they like oil, they want help to fight wars, and there are just so many Jews and so many Muslims and Arabs around that it's just not politically smart to side with the Jews at the time. So I think by the time, I'm not sure about the exact number, but I think by the time Israel is established, there are a few hundreds of thousands of Jews in Israel, and about probably a similar number, a little bigger number of Arabs in the area. I don't know if you have the exact numbers, but I do have the numbers of the immigration, so that's why I'm assuming, I'm trying to assume that.
I think the spirit is more important than the technical details here. And so then in that time you start to get this sort of conflict start to simmer, right?
Yeah, but it's not true to say the conflict started there. It's completely untrue, because the Jewish population in Israel suffered from what we call the P'ra'ot, from those massacres, way before Israel was established in the land of Israel. Those were happened before Israel was established, like I think it was the Hebron massacre and the massacres before. Those are like before World War I. Some of them happened. So to say the conflict started there is again, it's a big mistake. The conflict between Jews and Arabs in Israel did not start with the land of Israel, with the establishment of Israel.
But then in those massacres, there are also some counter massacres as well, right? Where you have some.
So when you give me a proof that the massacres were initiated by Jews, I have not seen a proof like that yet. most of them, because the Jews were a minority, most of them, I'm just, as a scientist, it's hard for me to say all of them because there's always exception, but all of them that I know was all initiated by Arab aggressiveness. But let's say, like, undoubtedly, an angry villager, a Jewish villager, will retaliate, or will try to retaliate, or I don't know, even maybe, let's say, even initiate something. The point is that the conflict did not start there. The conflict starts because of the fact that Jews were Jews and Arabs were Arabs. That's where the conflict started, and it's unfortunate. I wish that's not the reason. And I know it's much easier to say, to have an idealistic view and say, Jews and Arabs always got along. The only conflict here is a land. That's not true. It's absolutely not true. It might be more true today because people evolve, and the Arab society of the time was much more radical than the Arab society today. It could be true for the Jewish society as well. So,
well, also, it's a huge marker of that time period as well. This kind of war of races sort of theory you have going on.
yeah, we all were idiots.
Right. Well, I think were might be a bit of a strong word.
I will go with you on that.
But you kind of, I was listening to a lot of the listen to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History on the rise of the Japanese Empire, and you have that the racism is prevalent on all sides, really, because the Japanese have a certain racism towards other Asians who they saw themselves superior to, but then also the racism that the British and Americans had towards the Japanese are largely what caused them to succeed, because they kept underestimating them, and they thought, okay, an Asian culture could never have this kind of sophisticated military, and they kept being taken by surprise.
Yep.
So that to say, it seems to be a huge marker of this point in history that the race, the tribe, the ethnicity is one of the most central things to what makes reality in people's minds.
So, no, I totally agree. But I'm just saying, and it's unfortunate that the dispute is not only territorial, it's racial, and it's a religious one as well. But maybe if we're taking a more contemporary look on things today, I think most of the claims, at least in what may probably when in people's hearts, like I want to believe that in most Palestinian hearts, their conflict with me is not me being Jewish, is the fact that they believe that I stole the land from them.
Right.
Which is something a little more solvable than me being Jewish, that I cannot solve.
Right.
But maybe with discussion and understanding, and we can somehow work around this stupid dispute on the land that, again, it's really hard for me. I think that as a basis, is just as a basis, we need to understand that I need to hear from any Palestinian or Arab leader anywhere the Jews deserves some kind of a state. I'm not asking them to give me borders. Some kind of a state of a state in Israel where everyone have equal rights, but it's a Jewish national, like it's a place where the indigenous people, the indigenous Jews, are establishing their state. We can go to the future idealistic if a nation state needs to exist or not, and I'll tell you, I'm like actually pretty radical about it. I think that in the far future, well, I wish that it was true now that ethnic states should, like, we don't really need them, but that's not going to be true to the present. It's just not true. You cannot take a people that have been oppressed for ages and been denied their sovereignty, and they say, hey, now let's let's make it a open immigration country. No, that's not how it works. You can't every people needs to evolve to it. There's just a lot of thoughts that I had around how to make an idealistic world. Every people needs to evolve to it after they have a sense of security and freedom. People cannot be forced. You cannot take a people, dismantle dismantle them, oppress them for 1,000 years, and then tell them, hey, who needs a nation state right now? Like it's just not. It will never work with people's minds. People won't be ready for it. It will never. At this time, I believe that the Jewish people was one of those people around the world that got oppressed, that suffered from colonialism, like many Arab states, by the way, as well. Many of them suffered from colonialism. They need to establish a sovereignty, a place that will be safe with their neighbors for 50 years, 100 years. And then I believe that even naturally, but even not, if not naturally, then I'll try to push for it, that those borders will dissolve. Because that's the point eventually. Like we all if there is no hostility, why won't you be able to come and live in Israel a little bit? And and why were your friend's grandpa cannot just come and live in Israel and me go to ancient Judea to look a little bit on the mountains where Palestinian villages are today. Like ideally, that's what needs to happen. It's just I think it's a gradual process. That's all.
Right. There's kind of two elements to it. There's the world that should exist, and the world that does exist
and can exist
and can exist
and can exist right now. Like I mean, realistically, But you're right. The world that should exist is still a little far from me. I'm sorry. So going back to I think your questions about number wise and everything. So there is a Jewish population here that started with and increased under the British mandate, and there was a Palestinian population here that started and increased under the British mandate. Both increased substantially under the British mandate, and I think one part of it was because they both know it's a race of saying where you're, because the Brits that were supposed to work in order to establish a homeland here or a government did not do it. They sat here. Here I'm not in Israel right now, but there and they hard to say exploited. Not everyone in Britain exploited it, but in general there was no real progress towards any stable government, and eventually they left.
Right.
They just left. We had enough. Those Jews, those Arabs. And they left, and what happens is that we left with a conflict, right? So there was probably both the Jews and the Arabs probably saw that the Brits are not going to take control over the situation ever, and Jewish immigration was mainly also driven by the fact that they were slaughtered everywhere else, and both populations grew in Israel. But at the beginning, when Jewish population just started, and Arab, Palestinian, now today Palestinian population also increased this influx, the land was not very densely populated. The numbers are ridiculously low. I think that when it starts, we're talking about a few tens of thousands of people in a land that today has 8 million people. So more, the mandate was much more. So there was definitely room for people to come in, and then the partition plan comes, right? And in the partition plan, like, again, I know the facts. The partition plan was offered, and I'll tell you how it is from my view. The Jewish people finally gets, of course my view is Jewish, but finally gets a chance to regain its homeland. It's beaten. It's dwindling down because of the Holocaust and everything. It's desperate to get any recognition by a world that neglected it for 2,000 years. And they offered a deal, which is, I think, a poor deal. The partition plan is an unfair, completely unfair deal for the Jewish people that was offered by a bunch of colonials with a bunch of dictators that sits together and call themselves the UN. Like, that's really who ruled the world. It's a bunch of white men with dictators. That's who ruled the world at that time. And they didn't care. They just wanted, they were thinking about the economy. They were thinking about the oil shipments. They just wanted a solution. They offered the partition plan. And it's a completely unfair solution. And because it offered the Jewish people actually got a much, much smaller, what it did, it's first, the whole mandate was Israel today and Palestine and Jordan today, right? So it's first of all divided with the River Jordan and took all of this and said, this is Transjordan. This goes to the Arabs. That's the first thing it did, right? This goes to the Arabs. They put a king there, and this goes to Arab. That's first of all to the Arab people that have 55 countries and well, not, that's Muslim countries. It's not Arabs, but still a lot of Arab countries and a land that is, you know, gigantic, and it takes it, it gives it to Arab rule. Back then, there is no real Palestinian identity still. Like, there is very small Palestinian identity, but there were the Arabs that are living in Israel or call themselves Egyptians or Jordanians. Most of them were Jordanians or Syrians. Actually, I think I have it there somewhere. The Arabs envoys at the time are saying that Palestine is not even a real word. It's all known that South Syria. That's all, and that was their claim, that Israelis are not supposed to have a state there, because Israelis were considered also Palestinian there, and they were like, no, you have no right. This is just South Syria. That's what they were saying. That's what Arabs leaders were saying. That's what the leaders of the population here in Israel were saying. And there was, at the time, there was just a very small traction of let's call it Palestinian nationality. That it's just started, I think, after World War I, and it was very insignificant until 1967, where Palestinian nationality was actually shaped to a strong claim. So I talked so much, I forgot my point.
so we're getting past that, right?
Oh, we were going to the partition plan. Yeah. So at that time, they were given Jordan to the Arab collective back then, right? Put an Arab state there. 70% of it were citizens of the mandate. That's why they were called Palestinians. I don't know where they brought the 30 extra percent. And then Israel itself is being divided there, where about 50-50 between Jews and Arabs. And I think it's a very unfair solution. It's unjust, both because of the population there, but both because of historical context. And Israelis still said yes. The Jews said yes there. The one who said no were Arabs. Palestinians of today, every Arab leader said no. Basically, they said, no, there will not be a Jewish state here, not even on a compromise like that, no matter what. And that's, I assume, is a common knowledge, right?
Right. So and then immediately then, which Arab nations then invade?
So what happens is the Israeli says, okay, we have a mandate from the UN, right? We have a mandate from the UN. The partition plan was offered, never accepted. So our last chance of a country is going bye-bye. So what we will do is we'll just make our own country. We have no choice. And Israel declares its own country on the borders of the partition plan, the unfair borders of the partition plan, right? And a day after, the Arab countries invade. And the Arab countries that invades are Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. There were battalions from Iraq. There were battalions for Saudi Arabia, I think. There were battalions from Kuwait, I think. So all those countries invade to a 1 year old, a 1 day old country, basically, like a newly born country, in an unprovoked war of survival. Now, it's very hard for me to understand how anyone would say that there is any justification to a war like this, especially not with the claims, not with the claim was, we're gonna, as we talked before, we're gonna wipe the Jews out, like we were gonna literally kill them all. So so please, every Palestinian population here at the time was just Arab population, leave so we can wipe them all, and then you'll come back. That was the point. Same goes with the 6-day war later after that too. So yeah, those are the states that invaded. You had more question about that?
No, so I guess to kind of like abridge the history up to this point, there's been several more wars. Most of them defensive wars for Israel, except was it the 6-day war that was preemptive?
So what would you call preemptive? All of them were defensive in my point of view. When you say preemptive, when you mean that a day before they attacked, we attacked because we know that they're going to attack, because we caught their transmission saying tomorrow we're going to kill you all, then yes, it was preemptive, but it was purely defensive.
So then through those wars, Israel's territory and military control has grown larger and larger.
So the actual only real expansion is 1967, right? There was some expansion in 1948, but it's not significant. And even Palestinians today do not, well, at least the ones that are actually negotiating to a two-state solution, we're talking about in 1967 lines. So in 1967, that's where the majority of expansion happened. Again, as a defensive war. And that in that case, I need, like I have family that lived through this. Like I have family that lived through 1948 as well, actually, but that remember that war as well. But 1967 is more recent history. It's not very recent, but still recent history.
Right.
Jews at the time were like, enough. This is the last time that we need to protect ourselves, because those wars that happen once after the other are not just wars that happens between two sides. It's wars that happens, as you mentioned, and is well known, defensive wars, in which one side wants to wipe out the other. So as long as Israel wins, it's fine. But if Israel loses, there is no Israel. Like it's not that if Israel wins, gone Egypt. No, it's not true. Like Israel never had an ambition to conquer Egypt. It never had an ambition to conquer Syria. It never had an ambition to eliminate the population. It was a defensive war. And at a certain point you say, we cannot continue like that, because if we continue, one day we will lose. And the day we will lose, we'll cease to exist. So the point in 67 was, at least the mindset was, after we discovered that they're going to attack, and after this very successful attack on the Egyptian Air Force, where it's still on ground, when it was all annihilated, basically, Israel conquered the lands, those lands, what you call West Bank, what I call Judea and Samaria, because that's the name of it, and the Golan Heights and Sinai Peninsula. And then they, with the very clear declaration of, we took these, you want it back, you will get it back, but you need to sign peace treaty. You need to tell us that you stop attacking us. It's just enough. Like, and it makes perfect sense. It's like someone keeps hitting you. Eventually you'll take I don't know, they're hitting you with a stick. You'll take their stick and you say, you want a stick back, stop hitting me. Like it's just ridiculous, right? And that's the point. Now, maybe it's very important to just talk a little bit about 1967 war. In 1967, when Israel discovered that the Egyptians and the Syrians and the Judeans were going to attack, what Israel did, and this is some stuff that people don't know, they sent, many people that I know, they sent a word to what is Abdallah? I don't remember who was the king of Jordan at the time.
Yeah.
And they told him, please don't engage. We know that the Egyptians were going to attack us. Don't engage in the war. You want to engage in the war? we will not touch you. That's what Israel sent. There are letters, there are intelligence reports from both the US, the UK. Like, again, it's not a disputed fact. No one can dispute it. This is something that Israel did. And at the beginning, Abdallah was thinking about not intervening, but the Egyptians convinced them that the airplanes that they were catching on radars were Egyptian airplanes. They were actually Israeli airplanes coming back from the raid. And Abdallah get into the war. And then Israel was forced to engage the Jordanians as well. And then the Judea and Samaria, what you call today the West Bank, was conquered. And again, all this time, there is not a single time where Israel borders were defined by any real solution. The partition plan was first unfair, second of all, never got accepted. Not because of the Jewish people, because the Arab people. Then war after war after war. In 1967, this conquer happens. It was a very, very strong win for the Jewish people. Happened alone. Very glad that it happened because it stopped the status quo of a big war after big war. Like, didn't completely stop it, but I think that was the turning point. That was when many of the Arab states was like, okay, Israel is here to stay. We're not going to wipe it off the map tomorrow. And then this negotiation starts, right? But what happens is that just like in 1948, many of the population, the Arab population in the areas of engagement, mainly with Jordan, which is where we didn't want to engage, we didn't want to conquer it, but the Jordanian population there, they considered themselves Jordanians at the time. It had to be displaced, right? It was displaced mainly because they thought it's going to be a long war. I would move out, right? Like, it's not. Don't blame any of them. Who wants to be in a place of a of a war, right? Don't blame any of them. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's their fault, but they moved into. It's Jordanians that moved from one part of Jordan to one part that was illegally occupied by Jordan. That's very important to say. The West Bank at the time and East Jerusalem at this time are Jordan-owned illegally, not recognized by anywhere around except maybe Arab states around the world. They just grabbed it after the British left, right? And then because Jordan was established first. So they grabbed it and they illegally conquered it. So at the moment, at least in legal eyes, it's not really belongs to anyone. Now, there is a population there, and what happened to it is a disaster. It's like, it's a tragedy. They had to leave, and now Israel conquered it, and they weren't allowed to come back, basically. Well, Israel did offer a lot of them to come back. I don't know if they just didn't want to live under Israeli rule. I don't know if that's because they believe that still one day Israel will get wiped out, or I don't know what the reason is, but they did not. Many of them did not come back. Some of them did. I think it was I don't know, about 100,000 refugees eventually were admitted back to Israel by Israel, and were able to get to settle back in what is now considered the disputed area, and into Israel itself also, by the way. 1948 refugees, some of them were able to get a blue ID after that. All of them not for several reasons. Some of them are security reasons, some of them because they didn't want to, and some of them because people made mistakes and Israel made mistakes too, and some of it was a mistake. But they did offer several times, and I don't think that needs to be an obvious thing that a country that was just attacked by people over and over and over and was trying to destroy it will just say, hey, you guys can come back here. Because the point was to exchange those territories for peace. Now, as you know, peace was done in turn with return of territory with Egypt. What Egypt did at the time was saying, fine, but we don't want to take Gaza. Gaza was a Arab, Egyptian populated territory of people that lived under the mandate of Britain. So for Egypt, it was, I don't know if it's because of the poverty of the area or because they didn't consider them real Egyptians because they were living under the mandate for so long. I have no idea why, because they are related family-wise, but Egypt did not want Gaza at the time. Same goes with Jordan. A peace was done with Jordan, and the West Bank was offered back to Jordan. Jordan didn't want the West Bank. It asked that we will work for the independence of the population in the area. That was part of the peace treaty with Jordan, and they got oversight of the holy places for Islam. So the Waqf got oversight of Al-Aqsa Mosque and Harbayt. I don't know the English and the Arabic names for all of them, and other areas that are like considered under Jordanian sponsorship or authority or protection, whatever. But again, that is what creates the big now refugee problem. There are people that have not been wanted to be taken back by what we considered at least as their countries, and I don't blame them for wanting independence because they're not being considered Jordanians now. They don't consider themselves Israelis, so they are in a very tough spot, in a very bad spot, an unfair spot for them, and the Palestinian liberation movement is starting to gain very, very strong traction from 1967, and now we are in a pickle because now there are voices in Israel that says, hey, the borders from the beginning, the borders will offer us, they never got accepted, and instead of it we got a war, were unfair to begin with. Jordan doesn't want this area. This should be an Israeli area, and they're not 100% wrong. They're just not realistic, and also their solution for me is inhumane. Like, there is a population that lives there. There are very little, if any, Jews. Like, there are very, very little amount of Jews live there. So that most of the population there is gonna be hostile. They don't want you as their ruler, and there is no real, like, I understand there is a historic connection to the land, and people, there are some people are very passionate about it. But for me, the idea of ruling an area like that is stupid, almost. Like, it's just inhumane. Like, I don't see this happening without the Palestinian population. They're suffering more than what they already suffered. So, go ahead.
So let's use that as a transition to the kind of current situation.
Yeah.
So it seems like the biggest. Would it be fair to say the kind of biggest contention point between Israelis and Palestinians right now would be the Gaza Strip?
Contention, you mean like violence?
Yeah, like actually where not just ideological disagreements, but actual problems flaring up, people dying.
No, the actual violence. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is very little. Like, there is a strong tension in the West Bank, but there is very little violence if you compare it. The actual violence happens with Gaza today, that is being ruled by a terror organization, designated as a terror organization by every country with eyes in the world, and that's a big problem, and that's a very big problem. Gaza has history as well with the Itnat, right? With like the Jews were living there as well. My mom used to go to shopping in Gaza, and no, nothing happened before, but slowly the area got radicalized because there was no solution in sight. So eventually in 2000 I don't remember when the election was there. I think it was 2005 actually, when Hamas gained control, and later the disconnect of the Jews from the area. And ever since, Gaza is like or for us is like basically an enemy area, complete enemy state, in which the controller is literally have on their agenda, on their how do you call this document of principles, whatever they have, their treaty, their document of beliefs have that the Jews in Israel needs to be killed, all of them, and like not much difference than ISIS in my eyes. So yeah, there's a big problem there.
So I think from Western audiences, right, it's pretty easy to look at all that and feel pretty comfortably on the Israeli side. But
I don't think that's true.
You don't think that's true?
No, well, on what I said, yes, but not on what you hear as a report. I think that today's Western diet, and it depends also who you talk to with a Westerner people. If you listen to what I said, yes, definitely. I think that, yeah.
What you've got is it's an interesting dichotomy, because you've got a sort of secular liberal state widely hated by Western liberals,
yes,
but loved by Western conservatives who are not siding with the religious conservative state in the
I'm completely confused by all of this too.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Exactly. So I think that the problem, I have a whole manifest. That's the word I was looking for before. Anyway, I have a whole manifest of criticism, both to the conservative side in America and the liberal side of America, and in the US, and in general in the West. All right. And I think that as a Jew, my problem with conservative should be obvious. I don't know, at least not in generally conservative, but the problem is that, let's say, the extreme right is a big problem for me, obviously, and because of my heritage as a Jew, I have big problem with anything that even remotely relates to racism or oppression of freedom of religion, and those are very I don't know. I for me, it's like obvious to me. To me, it's very obvious what's my problem with the right side of the map. And of course, I cannot generalize. It will be stupid to generalize. I'm not trying to generalize. I'm just saying where my problems are. But with
let's dig a little deeper here, because I want to hear what you have to say about the left as well.
Okay.
But let's dig into conservatism more, right? So the largest American podcast, right, on the conservative side would be the Ben Shapiro show, and Ben Shapiro is an Orthodox Jew,
right?
So that's obviously a very different worldview than, say, the alt-right type crowd,
right?
So what do you think about the sort of
Ben Shapiro types?
Yeah, Ben Shapiro types.
Okay, so I disagree with Ben Shapiro on many things. Many things, actually. Our worldview is like totally different, I would call it this way. I am not very versed in his in all of his like when I talk to my progressive friends, I know that they're saying he said this and this and this, and I cannot say that I've seen him being very racist, but there are many problems of his worldview when I think they are racist, that he doesn't see them or doesn't conceive them as racist, which is, for me, is someone that I can still talk to, which is a good. So I can have a conversation with Ben Shapiro, but we will disagree on many things. Some of them are abortions. A lot of them are on the existence or disexistence of equal rights or equal opportunity in the US, because he has a very strict definition, for me, is a narrow definition of what equal opportunity for people in America means, which is not taking into account a lot of historical context. So yeah, I'm not like, but I don't have a, I think that people, I don't know if the audience of Benjamin, it's just hard for me to generalize because I'm not part of that audience. So I don't know if those are people that are resonating with alt-right or not. But if they're not, and I want to assume and believe that they're not, as you just presented, they're different people, then I don't have a specific big problem with who they are. I do have a lot of problem with their policies, both inwards and outwards. I think that their policies, in many times, come without realizing that it's is ignoring the, let's call it, the privileged life that they had, this hierarchy almost that were placed in the world due to very racist or very wrong deeds that happened in the past. That's one of my opinion. I don't know if I'm trying not to get too into details here. I don't want to get too angry.
So we can get into more details about what we both think as individuals soon. Mm-hmm. I just want to kind of get a little bit of more of a sort of sweep of the map first. Yeah. And then before I interrupted you were talking about the one, you have your holdbacks about the right, and then when it comes to the left in the US.
So yeah, when it comes to the left side, my problem again can be pretty obvious, that many people on the liberal side have an anti-Israeli view. My problem is where it comes from, because when I try to talk to them, and that's what I mainly met as a university activist. I didn't meet many fascists,
Right?
Definitely not in the University of Washington. Like, you should be a suicidal man if you want to be fascist in the University of Washington. But a lot of the people I met were leftists, defined themselves as progressives, and from what I've seen, like, that their knowledge on they are very passionate about a goal that they know nothing about, like literally nothing about. Like, people could tell me nothing about the amount of information that the average activist has is ridiculously low, and what I think shapes their opinion is just that Hollywood notion of weak versus strong, of oppressed versus oppressor, and it's a very, very, very binary look, very simplistic, on the verge of idiotic view, and I'm sorry if whoever get offended of it, of very complex situations, and that's something that hurts me, because I see it starting from the university activists all the way to the politicians, to the the leaders of them, that they have. They're seeing it through their eyes. Many times they're seeing it through an eye of someone that they've never been in risk, have never been, no one doubted their right to exist or their right to have a safe place to live in, and those, and if it doesn't fit to their Hollywood narrative, then it must be untrue. It's just hard for me to, like, yeah, it's very hard for me. It's even harder for me because those are people that I resonate on so many other levels. It's just hard.
Right. It's almost this worldview of, okay, we look at a situation and we find out who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor, and we side with the oppressed. Right.
Yes.
And I hate that worldview completely, because from as a Christian, but also just as experience with people, right? All of us have had crappy things done to us by other people, right? And do crappy things to other people, right? That's what being a person is part of the time. That's not to say everyone has suffered or inflicted as much suffering as every other single other person.
Right.
But all of us kind of have that in us. So to look at any kind of conflict and say, okay, who is the good guy, who is the bad guy, without being able to have a kind of any kind of nuance, is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, totally. But I want, because this is what I want from the Western activists. If you are passionate enough, learn, like do the homework, study, go into it. If you're not, and you don't need to be like, you have so many other things in your head, on your head, like it's fine. Like I don't know everything about, the Armenian genocide. I don't. Some people would say no genocide, but I think it was. But I don't have enough information about all this, and I'm not gonna create strikes or in schools. So I'm not gonna look at people now that support Turkey and gonna spit in their face and gonna call them baby killers. It's like, because it's I have other things that I'm passionate about. I'm not saying that this is not something I need to be working on, but if I will ever want to make it one of my activist goals, then I will take the time, get into the intricacies of the exact situation, and try to like not to view it as a black and white state. Like I'm gonna try and understand like everything about it, like everything about everything I will be passionate about. So if you don't have the time or don't have the wish to get into it, just, I don't know, continue fighting for healthcare, but don't get yourself into something where you have no influence and no real valid opinion about. That's mainly my big problem. I wish that everyone would care as much as I do. In that case, let's learn together. But until then, I don't think that most people care enough. I really don't.
Well, in some ways, it's actually like your religious answer for people. That
I guess so.
There's a sort of there's a difference between kind of being on the left wing here, and then also having this sort of social justice warrior type religion, or in some ways, that you have this entire view of reality that it has very specific beliefs and very specific way of looking at the world, and a very specific thing that needs to happen to the world that isn't based in pragmatism at all. It's all based on this it's almost theology. It's not really, but that's kind of what it is, right?
I agree. Yeah. So it's yeah, it's just lack of view of complex situations, which is it's very, very unfortunate. It also leads to like an extremist response when you view something as necessarily oppressed versus oppressor. You become very passionate and demonizing, and because you're not trying to understand anything there. And I think that one of the biggest obstacles to intervention in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the lack of ability to talk to the people, like to let's say understand what humiliates Palestinians, for example, and what humiliates Israelis. Like, and I gave you the Israeli point of view here, but easily I can say that telling Palestinians they are not deserved to live in the land is a ridiculous thing for a person like like grandpa of was the grandpa, right, of your friend's grandpa that had to leave. Like for them it's a ridiculous thing to say to them, or even to tell them God gave it to me. Is like, this is not something that will bring to any resolution, and also in their point of eyes you're dismissing them, you're eliminating them. Same goes with Israel, or telling them you don't live in Israel, you live in Palestine. You're not going to get any good response from an Israeli, from a Zionist about something like that, like because you're when you're saying it, you're literally ignoring the huge historical unjust, injustice that is related to this name for a Jewish person. So it's just learn both sides, learn how to communicate with both sides. Maybe you can intervene better. Maybe we can help.
So I'm curious. There's the social justice warrior religion is one side of it. So I'm curious how you think through, as sort of a secular Jew, how you think through religion's role in this conflict. Kind of like you're escalating things, right? Because you've got some versions of Islam with like Hamas who don't want Israel there. You've got certain types of religious Zionism which may pour fuel on the fire, and then you have a lot of Christians in the US who are uncritically supportive of Israel without really knowing anything about it either because of Bible prophecy. How do you see all that?
You said it, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
you said it, and it's. I think it's pretty. It's. You said it pretty clear. I think that in general, religion has obviously a very big role in the identity of both people. Now, the collective Palestinian people and the Jewish people. But in terms of conflict, I feel like it's more of a disturbance than anything else. I don't. Yeah, I think that it makes the whole situation a lot harder. Mostly because many religious people tend to give a sort of a religious solution, like you kind of said. It's either this or that, right? If God gave me this land, it's mine. If God, it's kind of like, I don't see a very good solution coming up from religious arguments here. Either it belongs to the Muslim because God decided that the Jews don't deserve it anymore, or it deserves to the Jews because God gave it to the Jews and the Muslims are false prophets. Like it's not gonna go anywhere, right? And if you go to a U.S. view, then first of all, there are a lot of churches here. Well, not a lot. I wouldn't say a lot. The minority just here, they are very critical of Israel, but in a way that is like ridiculous, almost like you Jews killed Jesus, which is also stupid. Luckily for me, it's a minority, but the rest of them, like that you say that are blindly supportive of Israel, this for me it makes my job sometimes a little harder. I'm thankful for support, right? But it's very hard for me to explain, when people make arguments that for me are invalid, and also for the people that I'm trying to talk to are invalid. So I think that most of the people that you need to convince in this situation, or the people that have hope to solve the situation, are not going to follow religious arguments. Not because they're not religious, just because they are more pragmatic to a situation. So for me, many times it's hard. Again, like most of the time when I talk to a let's say a evangelist Christian, most of the time I get only love and support. So I have no complaints about that, right? But to say that I think that they are necessarily know why they support the situation, I don't think so.
So in my mind, a lot of modern evangelical support for Israel is like, it's like a middle school guy with a crush on a girl who he never talks to.
So it's like, explain yourself.
Okay, so it's kind of like that. This kid is in class every day. There's a girl who sits 3 rows away from him, who he doesn't know a thing about, but is obsessed with because of the way she looks, and idealizes what he thinks she's like, and then is obsessed with her. Now, if they actually talk to each other and were friends, then some of that might be true, some of it would not be true, and you'd actually have to deal with the person. But the girl can't really couldn't really have a relationship with this guy because it's all about this ideal he's built of her.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
No,
And
it's very important not to generalize here too much because like I at least as part of Stand With Us, I also met with a lot of evangelical people that are very knowledgeable of the situation. They have a very good a grasp of what's going on, and they have opinions that are probably biased because of what they grew up with, but we all are at some point. But their reasoning is perfectly sound of why they're supporting it. There are a lot of those people, and most of the time, those are the people that are also going to show up to events like that are talking about the conflict because they care to know more about the conflict and not only to pledge their support, right? But to tell you that they are not blind, they're people that are just blindly doing it, just like the way you just described it, no, that definitely exists. That definitely exists. Probably weird for you as a Christian. I can say that it's weird for me. There's a lot of people that their support of Israel is very weird for me that I don't understand because I don't think that they really know anything about the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I think I came from a situation where I would have had a much more uncritical support for Israel growing up, and now I have a ton of Arab friends, and so I find myself I find myself in a sort of weird position. But also I think my theology has grown as well.
Okay.
For me, the relationship I have with Israel and Palestine is more a case of having a different view of what God is doing in history more than anything.
Okay.
So if you what I kind of grew up believing, right, is that the world keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
Until the Messiah comes.
Then the Messiah comes, and then
Okay.
it's
so you grew up evangelical?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you know much more than me about how you like the world of you there. Yeah. So go ahead. I'm listening.
So now for me, right, one thing that's changed for me is I've started taking a more. If you look at what the Tanakh says about the kingdom of God on earth,
Mm-hmm.
What's really interesting about it is that it's not this Israeli empire.
No,
It's
never was.
No, it's never was, right? Israel is a nation defined by its laws, its borders, and its people, not by its king or capital city, which is different, right? And what you see in the book of Daniel is that in the time of the fourth kingdom, there's a stone cut by no human hand that comes and smashes to pieces all the kingdoms of the earth, but blesses all the nations of the earth. And God's...
So, yeah, that you kind of lost me in that story.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So if you break down the way the Tanakh looks at the nations of the world, the Goyim, right? You have a favorable view of all the people groups living everywhere. Because from the beginning...
Most of the time, not all the time.
Well...
okay, well, and then there we come to the differences of how we see it. I see the Tanakh as a book that was written by different people from different times, different hands, different interests, different opinions. It was gathered together to have sort of a kind of like dramatization of history. That's how I see it, like with interests and agendas, and so you can easily see, for example, and again, this is not supposed to be a religion, a religious. Well, I'm not supposed to analyze religion here, so I'm sorry if anyone religious is getting offended here. Not it's not my purpose.
This is episode 31, dude. If anyone's going to get offended, they'd be gone by now.
Yeah, it's true. So at true, like you can see in the stories of David, for example, the way I study this, I in Israel you study the Tanakh as well, but I studied in a very I would call it the liberal school. So we studied them, but we also analyzed them. And you can easily see how the stories of David have probably been written by the house of David, where sins that if Saul would have done would have condemned him for eternal torture a while ago, done by David, are almost being forgiven much easier, almost being and you know, Saul has been portrayed all of a sudden as this monster because David's supposed to replace him. And so you can see sometimes you can see the agendas and the view of other people is a lot of time positive, sometimes not so positive. It depends on the time and who have written it, in my opinion. But go ahead, make the rest of your point.
So you're right. We do have a very different opinion on that, right? Where
That's what I thought.
Right. So I literally believe the Tanakh are the words of God.
Okay.
Even the
And
parts everyone
my
thinks are
apologies.
crazy. No. I brought you on to be you.
Yeah.
And so like I literally believe the Red Sea opened and Moses and the Israelites walked through. Like that's, I literally believe in the top.
I cannot prove it wrong. So
I just want you to know where I'm coming from. Right?
Yeah.
So there are but in the Tanakh, you have a goodwill towards the nations. It doesn't mean goodwill towards all ideas and idolatry, but God's message to Abraham is that I'm going to bless you, and through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed.
Right.
And then that is then promised to Judah, that all the nations will be ruled, blessed by the house of Judah. Then that's promised to David, and then the Messiah is there to rule the whole world as king. There's the descendant of Judah, descendant of David, and bring peace and law and flourishing to all
the
the
whole
nations,
world.
to the whole world, right?
He's gonna rule the whole world too, right?
Yes.
Or at least he's gonna guide the world. How's that?
Yeah.
Or he's gonna be king. He's gonna be king.
Yes, king of the whole world, right?
Yeah.
So the book of Daniel talks about in the time of the kingdom, in the time of the sort of four kings of the earth, talking about the Persians, the Greeks, the Babylonians, the Romans. A stone cut by no human hand is going to come and break to pieces all the kingdoms of the earth. There's a difference between a kingdom and a nation, right? A kingdom is about a man's pride, ego, and dominion, whereas the nations are about the different people groups being blessed under their own kind of self-determination.
Okay.
So, and then that grows gradually, blessing the world and filling it with the knowledge of the glory of God. So as a Christian, right, I believe that Jesus is the descendant of David who came to rule all the nations, right? But starts as this tiny stone and then grows and grows and grows.
I can see where you're going. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, but to bless all the nations. So I look at history. If you look at history from the time of Jesus until now, you have gradually seen that. You've gradually seen the kingdoms of the earth broken apart and the nations blessed. And now, you know, as imperfect as the United Nations is, you have quotes from the Tanakh on the top of the building about nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they make war anymore. So I believe that the kingdom of God isn't something that's coming in the future to break the world apart. It's something that started when Jesus came as king
and works towards making the world a better place slowly.
Exactly.
I got you.
So I'm not trying to look at Israel and Palestine as, okay, let's see how we can...
This is Israel, this is Palestine. You're trying to look at it as a collective world that is now supposed to become better by this chain of event that started with Jesus, which means both nations deserve a good solution, let's call it this way, a good outcome, a good involvement. It's not those are the chosen ones and not. Yeah, that's your point.
Almost, because I do still believe that God has a special place for Israel in his story, but it's not like they're kind of standing in the middle of the table looking down on everyone. It's that all the nations are sitting together at a table, and they're at the head of the table in a place of honor, but it's still as equals. So
Yeah.
I believe that God wants me to bless Israel and bless Palestinians and work for everyone's well-being, not
That's
manipulate
a,
the apocalypse.
yeah, that's a wonderful way to like, and again, it's like, first of all, it's a beautiful interpretation, and it's a wonderful way to still stay relevant for solving this with strong religious views. So yes, sure. Like I'll support that. I as long as we are still working towards a just solution, but just like a the case I've built here at least was not relying on any promise by a deity, not by God, not by anything else. It was built on history, and we have not got to the solution yet, because it's almost like the people that hear my beginning almost think I'm very extreme to Jews, Israel, but actually my solution is a lot more, at least my vision of a solution, I think, is a lot more pragmatic, is a lot more, it belongs to the left side of the map, even in Israel. But yeah, I still think that any solution to come, or any walk towards a better future, needs to recognize the history of both people, and I'm liking this willingness from a Palestinian leader. I'm not saying that I'm liking it definitely from the Palestinian population, but to this day, it's not only Palestinian. To this day, there was not a single Arab leader that said the Jews deserve a country in Israel, that said Israel can be a Jewish state. Some recognize the existence of Israel as a state that will be not, like, doesn't need to have a Jewish majority, or doesn't have to be, like, it's not belong to the Jews. It's just a state there. But that's because they weren't able to destroy it for centuries. So now you're saying, okay, it exists, but I don't know. I think it's a key thing towards a real solution. Anyway,
so that's a good transition point, right?
Yeah.
Because again, we come at this from completely different angles,
right?
But there's still space for people who think differently to work together, right? Because
100%.
And there's certain things within my worldview that allow me to do that, right? Because as a Christian, there's a big difference between what I think is going to happen in the future and what should happen now. And this is what I mean.
Right.
So
I'm the same. Yeah.
So if I believe, for example, yeah, you were talking about this earlier, right? But so if I believe at some point in your life or the life of your great grandchildren, everyone's going to wake up and think Jesus is the Messiah, and that's going to solve all the world's problems, right? That doesn't mean that I have the right to push anyone into that now.
Exactly, and or to believe that it's going to happen anytime soon.
Right.
Same goes with mean borders, right? One day borders will fall down, which is basically will probably happen if everyone except Jesus for your definition of the Messiah. So yeah, but we don't think we're realistic. We don't. First of all, I don't think it's true. Not many people does not have a right to even push there. Some people maybe do, but even when you do, you have to recognize the situation and how it's going to evolve. And not every people will be ready to accept a solution like that at the same time. Like, it's a gradual situation. Yeah.
And then the belief that God is going to act does not authorize you to act on God's behalf. So one of the key instances in the Tanakh we're talking about, say, David and Saul, right? One instance, it says that in Saul's zeal for the people of Israel, he persecuted the Gibeonites. And David then has to go and kill 7 of Saul's sons to make up for what Saul has done to the Gibeonites, because Joshua had made a promise to them that Saul had violated, right? So even from the Tanakh, being God's chosen people gives no one the right to violate another person's rights or
Right.
steal
Right.
from them.
Right.
You've got to enforce justice and only justice with no partiality.
Right.
So how do you think we get there in Israel right now?
Can I turn it back to you?
Oh yeah, please. Yeah.
Why won't you tell me first? What do you think a solution would be?
Okay.
Yeah, obviously, I'm not expecting you to give me now a 40-page strict step-by-step solution, but you know.
So I think for me, it starts with, well, just let me tell you an anecdote first, right? I went to Israel in 2014, and I stayed in the Arab district of Jerusalem. And every morning, I had a 7-month-old son at the time. This Palestinian lady would come, and she would hold my 7-month-old boy and walk him around, and they were so nice to him.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone loved us there. Everyone was so good to us.
Why not?
Then we go to the Israeli districts, and everyone was so nice to us as well, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah, so that compassion and humanity they're able to show to us, there's just this blocker on people holding against. They're just not showing it to each other. And if people could view each other the way they viewed my child, then that would help. But
okay, go ahead. I'll respond to this later. Yeah.
So there's something Jesus says that before you see the speck in your brother's eye, first remove the plank from your own eye.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of situations that people see themselves as the victim, and they use that to justify whatever they want to do to the person who they consider their enemy, because they see themselves as the victim, right? So Hamas, the people in the Gaza Strip, see themselves as essentially victims, and well, our survival is mandatory, and if we don't fight and we don't attack civilians, if we don't put our soldiers in schools and hospitals, then we're finished, right? But we're the victim, so that makes it okay. And I think the Israeli side does this the same way sometimes. There's certain soldiers that think, okay, well, we're the victims. We've gone through all these years of oppression. We've been invaded by our enemies so many times. And if we don't get the edge, anything we do to get the edge is justified because it ensures our survival. And I think you need to be able to kill that attitude and start with self-examination before you deal with other people's stuff, right? So if this conflict needs to start with, not with, okay, what are the other side doing, but how do I deal with me? And that's not to say you don't deal with the other side. Sometimes you have to. You still protect yourself, but you start by looking at you first, looking at your own people, looking at your own government, looking at your own party, and then you deal with the other side. Now, it doesn't solve everything. There's still questions to be answered, but everyone goes in with that attitude. That's a much better place to be negotiating with.
It's true, but you would say, all right, you understand that in my point of view, you gave no real solutions here. And I'll explain myself, and I'm sorry if I'm a little harsh. It's not my point.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it's just someone that has really been trying to think about how to solve this for a while. I've been a soldier, all right? I am a very competent soldier too, but when I go to a Palestinian village, I don't see everyone as my enemies. And when I see the kid there, I come in with candies in my pockets. I can give a candy to the kid. And if someone is needs help, like there is I have a friend that used to be a part of a unit in the Israeli military called Kogat that is helping Palestinians in Palestinian territories, right? Help gays that have been prosecuting there, women that are being that have been raped and now they need to either marry or I don't know, or getting killed because their family believes that. And I'm not saying all Palestinians, I'm just saying those are the people that come to that those units help. So they come and those are Palestinians. They're supposedly the enemy, but it's not 100% not true to say that those populations are not kind to each other. They're actually, in many instances, are very kind to each other. And East Jerusalem can be Hebron also can be in many times, not the times you hear on the news, but in many, many times can be a very beautiful example of even the West Bank that you call today have thousands and thousands and thousands of examples of, without the one in the beginning, thousands of examples of beautiful coexistence and holding, whether it's Palestinian kids or Jewish kids by the other side, and walking and working together. Those happen every day, and those are mostly what happen every day. All right. Those needs to grow. That's what we need to build on, which is one of the reasons why I think the BDS could be the dumbest solution in the world. It breaks those cooperations. It breaks the cooperation of a person to a person, instead, like, just because they have a worldview of seeing someone liable to something. That's a big problem for me. But none of that. But
here's what I'm saying: that any practical solution needs to start with human hearts and person-to-person interactions.
100%. But this has been happening for ages. Like, it happened from the beginning of time. To think that this alone will lead to a solution is not. It's just
no. It's not the solution.
I don't think. Well, it's not. It's also not. Like, it has to happen because it helps people that want to act for a solution. It gives them hope. It gives them power, and it gives them it shows that it's possible. But yeah, we're like practically still when it comes even to those people that hold each other and go together, when it comes to Jerusalem, when it comes to the right of return, yes or no, when it comes to existence of Israel as a Jewish state, when it comes to those, the opinion are still mostly, not always, but mostly divided, and there so far have not been, like, what I want from you, I want from any Palestinian I ever talked to, or a pro-Palestinian person I ever talked to, is tell me how you see a fair solution. All right, tell me how you see a fair solution. So just realistically.
Yeah, so I think a two-state solution is what I would be in favor of.
That
doesn't mean it has to stay that way forever, but if it joined, it would be because people want it to join.
Right? So what two-state solution?
Two-state solution.
Sorry that I'm like, I'm not.
It's because I essentially believe in self-determination.
Yeah.
I think that people should be able to govern themselves. I believe in decentralization of power.
Not why. I was asking what kind. Like, how does it look like? Because two-state solution, that's easy. Even the right, the Israeli right, the Israeli left, all of them have declared on a two-state solution hundreds of times. Doesn't help me. How does it look like?
That I don't know. What did you think of the one the White House just put out?
The one White House put out just right now does not give any real. Well, it does, I guess. No, I think it's never going to happen. I think it's not realistic. Not because I'm an optimist, so I'm always thinking about the benefits from any offer, and there are a few benefits that can happen from this offer. But I think that this offer is non-realistic from several reasons. First of all, the way it's defined is humiliating to the Palestinians, and second of all, it comes from an administration that did everything it can to make the Palestinians not trust them. So there is no way that we will walk to a solution this way, and it does give legitimization to people in Israel to do acts that even they are the right acts, like the I'm getting to too many subjects here, but the Jordan Valley, I guess there's a part in the Jordan Valley that Netanyahu now is talking about annexing, right? Well, he always talks about it before election, because whatever. But because the promises of politicians that are not. But this area has never been doubted to belong to Israel in a peace agreement, not by the Palestinians and not by the Israelis. Every time that there was any talk about it, it was like this area goes to Israel and this area goes to Palestinians and to Palestine, and the area that they're talking about annexing was always going to go to Israel in any it wasn't really disputed. They're not talking about annexing Jenin or Nablus. They're not talking about that. They're talking about but doing it without the negotiation, is going to put the moderate Palestinians in a very bad situations. And so I think it's a mistake, and like to do it this way. And I think that this administration offer gives legitimization to do it, which I don't think is the right thing to do. So I'm worried about that. But in general, if that ever brings Israelis and Palestinians to the negotiation table, then fine. Like whatever brings them to the negotiation table is good. Even this offer is not saying that it's not really determining anything. It's basically just trying to bring them both to the table, even though it's written in a very not in a good way. And the other optimist thing that I see from it is that's the first time in history that some Arab states are actually showing willingness and support to any offer made not by them that includes a Jewish state. They've never acknowledged that, yes, because again, it's maybe a political suicide for them, or I don't know what. They've never acknowledged it, but it's the first time they're pushing. Even though I'm not naive. I don't think that Saudi Arabia is pushing for it because they all of a sudden decide that this is the righteous thing to do. I think that they have a bigger agenda in mind, and this is just coincide with their agenda. Same goes with Egypt. Same goes but whatever it is that helps those things to coincide are a good thing. So maybe.
Well, and even those agendas change, right? Because if the nation's goal becomes like, we want to build this empire and take over this and build this ideal on earth, that's a risk to all of us. But if anyone's just like, I want to get rich and be left alone, it's not necessarily noble, but it's better, for the rest of us.
Well, in the point of Saudi Arabia and Egypt is mainly Iran, and the point that they want to have the full American support and Israeli support against what they see as a big threat. Israel also sees as a huge threat, right? Is Iran race for a nuclear weapon. That is all a whole other subject, right? But that's why I feel like it's the first time that it's just weird that it happens to the least favorable offer that has been done so far towards the Palestinian. That's what gets them in line. It's a little weird to me, but whatever. Just show how much they care. Yeah.
So to answer, I don't know exactly how it can work out, right? Because there's lots of things I don't understand many of the nuances of it. But in an overview, I think that I understand both sides desiring to protect themselves, and there's an element of, if people don't agree and if people refuse to agree, there's an element that only coercion solves it. And if coercion solves it, then that's going to probably end better in Israel's favor at this point. And I think the Palestinians need to do their best to be pursuing non-coercive solutions to this. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse and worse.
Yeah,
and they're going to have less and less to negotiate with.
Yeah, well, they're actually. So I'm using this argument as well, also to say sometimes to push the Palestinian side to work, but also I have a different argument to push the Israeli side to work, and that's that public opinion has actually been becoming less and less pro-Israeli with time. And you can say that if you wait, like it used to be that it was one-sided, 100%, the single democracy versus all the dictatorships around that is trying to annihilate it. But today is not this anymore. A lot of in the universities is very, very like, if you ask now, let's take America let's take the US as an example. But if you take the US in general, then you probably have 70% pro-Israeli, 30%, maybe 60-40 or 70-30. But if you go to young people, then you get more like 50-50 or maybe even towards Palestinian, in my opinion, because they don't do the homework. But the point is that it's not looking good for Israel to wait as well. So I'm saying you both shouldn't wait. Too much risky. Just get it over with, right? So I'm actually using both arguments to say, hey, it's not going to go to any of you to wait. You should just get on, because that's one of the big problem is that Palestinian leaders think that they can just hold it status quo for nothing, and Netanyahu now thinks that he doesn't have a partner, so he can just hold the status quo forever because he's the power, and that's a very dangerous notion because you're make suffer permanent for both sides, which is such a big problem. Yeah. Now I'm gonna tell you maybe I'm gonna put you into because it's hard. I don't know if it's hard for you because you don't put in the intricacies, but there have been solutions offered before, right? Many times. I don't know how much you know about those solutions, but those solutions were offered, like by Israel, offered several times. Then the U.S. initiative, the Arab League initiative, the European initiative. There were several times the offers, and they're all more or less similar. Except I'm not talking about the Trump offer right now, but I'm talking about the solution that were tried to work for this entire time, and obviously was a big failure. But the ideas are very similar. Two-state solution, right? Now Jerusalem is a big problem. So that's one problem that we have to see if we can solve, right? Jerusalem is a big problem for both. But in that case, is I think the more like, I think there are more Palestinians that are willing to get only East Jerusalem than Israelis that are willing to split Jerusalem again. So that's I would call a landmine for Israelis. Is mostly Jerusalem. Then you have the borders, right? The borders is a big problem that has not been accepted. I'm telling you what was, everything else was already agreed on. The borders were never agreed on. Time-wise, you gotta go?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So the borders were never, the border security was never completely agreed on. The borders more or less, except Jerusalem, was agreed on, but the border security, so who controls the coming in and out, mainly because Israel is very concerned that weapon will go just like what happened in Gaza the moment we left Gaza. Now Gaza has enough army, like enough arms like a small state. And now it's a big problem because now if we want to go into Gaza and stop it, we're talking about many casualties of both sides, which is horrible, right? So now we're like, we're stuck with Gaza, and we don't want it to happen in a whole Palestinian state. The Palestinians want to control their own borders because, hey, we're getting a state that has control our borders, so that's the second problem. The third problem is the right of return. And that's the third landmine. It might be the biggest landmine because, so all three of those three things are the main things that dropped every peace initiative so far. All the rest was agreed on. Even the territories, like there was about 97% exactly like the 1967 line, and then 3% of exchange of territories because there's a Jewish village here and there's a Arab village here, and we don't really need this area, so give us this area and take this area. There's a few exchanges. It's changes between 3 to 20% of exchanges, but mostly it's almost like it's territory-wise, it's very similar to the 1967 lines, which is supposedly got accepted, all right? And it was offered several times by both by Ehud Barak, by Ehud Olmert, by a U.S. initiative several times, and at least on paper, this was not the problem. Jerusalem is a big problem today, but Jerusalem was offered to get divided more than once by Israel. Israel offered to the Palestinians with the same borders that we already agreed on. They offered to divide Jerusalem to either, well, there was one offer that was talking about division. Most of the offers were talking about an international kind of like oversight where it belongs to both nations, it's capital of both nations, which is, I think it's a beautiful solution as long as there is freedom of religions to all and there is no republic to all. It's a nice solution because then you don't divide the city, and a Jewish person that really feels like, you know, East Jerusalem is really close to his heart or her heart, they have no problem walk and pray wherever they want. And same goes with Palestinians, right? But the right of return was never I think was never completely agreed on, because that's a big problem for Israelis, because it has a very big chance to eliminate the majority of Jews in Israel today. So who has the right of return is a very big problem here, and Israel is willing to accept, a certain amount of Palestinians back, but not a not an amount that will threaten the Jewish majority in Israel, because then it will not be a Jewish state. It was not the self-determination of Jews. There is no Jewish majority in Israel. Also, my family is one of the families there are refugees from Iraq and from other Arab countries, and we're talking about territory that is about 8 times bigger than Israel. That Jewish around the Arab world lost 900,000 refugees. That today means a few millions of descendants, and no one offered me my share in Iraq, right? And I never thought that it's normal to demand it. Also, the Jews from Egypt, when we did a peace with Egypt, they didn't say wait, only if I'm allowed to get my territory back. Those are unfortunate but needed sacrifices for peace. I feel that may be unfair for me to ask for Palestinians to do, but and there obviously going to be some kind of a compensation mechanism that needs to happen. But I feel like this is one of those landmines that I don't see Israel able to compromise on. But yes, those are the main conflicts, and I don't know how, or if you have an opinion of how to solve them.
I think that it seems like all of I think Israel has an idea of kind of everything they would need to kind of give, but it's just taking all the risks onto itself at that point. It seems like, right?
What do you mean?
Well, right now Israel has really all the power in the region specifically, right?
I would call all the power in the region, but definitely the power in this conflict. Yeah.
Right, all the power within the nation of Israel, right? Within the borders of Israel and Palestine. And in any negotiation, it's taking a tremendous amount of short-term risks for all this to work out. So I think there needs to be some acknowledgement of that from everyone else in the scenario. I think, honestly, I think if were I the king of Israel, and
we don't have king for a while, man.
Yeah, I know, and I will never be the king of any country.
Although there's some that will disagree, and we say we have a king already. Anyway.
Yeah. But I think that basically, were I in charge of this on the Israeli side, I'd take the risks of giving people sort of the space and territory and the openness that they want, but with a caveat of, if you turn around and attack us again, this is just over.
It didn't happen before? Like every armistice line, every before the Palestinian solution also, but even I guess when you say offer this, offer what? Offer half of Jerusalem? Offer what?
Yeah, offer what you're saying, right?
What about the right of return?
If there's a two-state solution, then
it's a two-state solution.
Right. If there's a two-state solution and they can't vote and influence Israeli laws in Israeli territory, then I'd offer that. No,
they can. Well, no, they can't. Like, the point is, if they will live in Israel, Israel is not going to have an apartheid. Never. It doesn't have an apartheid too. Stupid statement to ever say. But if the point of right of return is that if you is the assumption that if you're going to live in Israel, you're going to have the right to vote, and you're going to have the right to this, but just Israel cannot agree to accept them, not because they won't have the right to vote, it's because they will have the right to vote. That's the problem, right?
Then what's the difference between a two-state solution and a one-state solution?
Exactly. And that's one of the things. Well, the difference is there is still a Palestinian state. There's no Jews in it. But this is today what the Palestinian leadership is offering. This is today what the Palestinian leadership is, and people don't understand that. A right of return, exactly what you're saying, is not a two-state solution. Is a one state for Palestinian, and one state that is a one-state solution for both of them. Like it's eliminating an existence of a Jewish state. So it is not a two-state for two people solution.
So then, if you have borders between them, could you offer a right of return that you could come live in Ramallah, but you couldn't then come and live in Tel Aviv?
That is what I claim needs to be the solution. This is what Palestinians so far did not agree on. Never, ever agreed on. They didn't. That this is one of the biggest landmines. That's why the peace offer so far has, one of the reasons the peace offer so far has dropped. And that's one of the things we need to solve. And if you think that the right of return should not happen because it's a two-state solution, then you are, in my opinion, with that. I think that some kind of a return, as much as possible, can and should happen. And it also depends on the Palestinian people if they want, because there are Palestinian Israelis or Arab Israelis that define themselves today. They define themselves as Palestinians as well, but they live in Israel with a blue ID. That's fine. Just not millions, because then it's not a two-state solution. That's all. And that's just my opinion. And that I wish that I can see more willingness for this from Arabs, because what you get is, I still have the key of my house in Israel, right? Well, you need to understand, if you're supporting a two-state solution, that you have to give away this key. I don't have my key in Iraq. Like, it's not. I'm sorry, but it's a sacrifice that has to happen.
There needs to be okay. This is people need to say. This is what we're getting. I'll agree to that. And the only other real solution is war and conflict at some point.
Right.
And that's it. You've got to decide: do you want a war, or do you want to come and negotiate? And if you're going to negotiate and you want peace, there's going to have to be sacrifices for that. And there's no other way around it. There's no way that both sides are going to feel completely secure. There's going to be some risks, whoever you are.
Yeah. So if you ask me, maybe now is not the best time, but an offer like this will return in the future. An offer like this was made by Israelis before, and it will return in the future, which unfortunately leaves me with doubts about whether the Palestinian leadership will be ready when this offer will come back. Because those exact offer that you portrayed right now, that I portrayed right now, were already made. Without right of return, but divide Jerusalem and get a Palestinian state, yada yada yada. And this is what I think should be the solution. I think that probably should have a gradual exchange on the borders and security both borders. So in the beginning, maybe it will be held by Israel, but in the events like that, there are no big clashes or whatever, then this will go down within 10 years to have eventually go to a complete Palestinian control, because they should have a control of the borders eventually. Just need to see that it works. And how to get there, I don't know. I thought through education. That's my big. I think that our biggest problem is I don't see it happening with the generation we have today. I just don't. I'm realistic. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that we have to work to build the next generation, but for that we have to put very hard push on what we teach the kids both in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority. And as long as kids in the Palestinian Authority are given a UN book that says that Israelis stole the land from them, and so they will never be that's what they grow to believe, it will be very hard to change their mind later on. And as long as Israeli kids, because some of them do grow up to believe that Palestinians are Arab invaders that are still holding land, and they want their livelihood, and they want Haifa and Tel Aviv, then we will not get to a solution there. It's important for me to note that I have a big problem with the comparison that you're making with the Israeli military and Hamas, just because I was a soldier, and I know that I countless times risked my life in order to not hurt any civilians, and that's the orders I was given. It's not that just because I'm a righteous, virtuous person. It's the orders I was given a lot of time is like, sometimes I would go to a very hostile area and said, don't shoot unless you're getting shot at. Not only, you see a man with a gun, like he has to shoot before you shoot him. And I was like, I will be dead if he shoots me, like I'm not, but sometimes those are many times the decisions, oftentimes the decisions you're making are in order to avoid civilian casualties in all cost. Also because those are civilians, mainly because those are humans that are innocent, but also on a wise strategic thinking, it's the wrong thing to do, because every time there's a civilian dead, you're getting demonized around the world. It doesn't matter if it was on purpose or not. Making this comparison with the organization that is purposely targeting civilians. So, okay, no, I can't even accept that they are hiding in schools and hospitals. But let's say that they're saying I'm hiding in schools and hospitals, otherwise I'm gonna get annihilated. Fine. But what makes you go in? What makes you train people to go and smash rocks on Jewish babies? Like how? Like and when this happens, you go out in the news, and say, thank you, you're a saint, you did it, you smashed a four-year-old girl's head. Like, I mean, that's not. And then you get a street named on you. Like, this is where the line is completely gone. Like, if someone Israeli, I'm not saying that this does not exist within Israel. Every population has more or less, I would call 10% jackasses, okay? 10% assholes.
At least that much.
Yeah, yes. This is not a scientific amount. I totally made it up. But there is a certain percent of, and Israel is not different. Jews are not superior. They're not smarter. They're not more virtuous. Just like any other population, just like in the US, we have racist people, we have assholes, and we have people that under stress forget their humanity. And so there are definitely, like, if you're going to go a step by step and look, hey, here there was a soldier that shot without without authorization. This guy was not unarmed, and look how he shoots at him. Look how he talked to this guy. Why did they have to like smash his closet? Why do you treat my grandpa this way? That you will find assholes, undoubtedly. But and every time this happens, I am the angriest person on earth, because first of all, it's like I'm embarrassed and I'm angry because they're killing my case, and also because they're like, who needs to treat any human being like this? But those specific examples will exist always. Systematically, this is not, I can say from my experience, and this will be very hard for anyone to convince me otherwise, because I've been there, I've seen it, I've done it. Systematically, the notion in the military or in Israel, I guess, is to avoid civilian casualties, and you cannot compare it to Hamas. Now, I'm not saying when you talk about the rest of the Palestinian population, then you can take a different viewpoint. But Hamas in general is it's called a terror organization because they're praising the guy that explodes in the bus. Like,
Right. And
that's a big problem.
And to clarify what I'm saying, I'm not comparing. I'm only in the sense of what we need to be focused on is the enemy within. before we're focused on the enemy without, right?
Which is agree, and that's a comparison that maybe we can do with the rest of the Palestinian population, maybe with the Palestinian Authority. It used to be a very, I would call it even a terrorist organization, and they're not. So you can talk to them. Still have a big problem with many of their policies. Some of them is that, the more Jews you kill, the more money you get, which is a horrible policy by the Palestinian Authority. But in general, still, like, there are always going to be assholes there. Always going to be assholes in this case. And if we are going to start looking at, like, you're going to show me pictures of dead Palestinian kids, and I'm going to show you, exploded bus with blood everywhere and fingers, then we all going to just, like, you telling me, oh, here, this is what happens to my grandpa, and I'm going to tell you, here, this is what happens to my friend, will not solve it. It's those are tragedies, and they should be answered, and they should be condemned, but they're not part of the solution for me. Like, they're
right.
If you're going to sit there and tell me that you guys are, child killers, and this is and this what you did, then I know that, listen, again, I don't want to go into an argument of, like, and here you this and this, because you're not going into a solution. So the solution needs to, first of all, go above this. The second thing that we have to do is, when I say education, is kill, like, literally kill revisionism, the notion of revisionism in both places, and now Israel that believes that the land was completely empty, and I don't know what, Palestinians are just part of the Muslim Brotherhood that wants Tel Aviv, like, that's a revisionism of history. But saying that Palestinians are descendants of Canaanites, or Jesus was a Palestinian that was killed, or like building indigeneity to the land that does not exist, because it's just not true. And especially as a scientist, it just drives me insane that someone just takes facts and completely change them. Or saying that, all Jews are white supremacists, like part of the activists here that are, like, driving me crazy. People do not let people with the pride flag and the Star of David to go into a women's parade, because they're saying that Zionists cannot be feminists, or they're saying that all Zionists are white supremacists, are like, this is a complete revisionism of what happens. So those revisionism needs to stop. That's the first step. We need to educate people on what really happened. When you know what really happened, you understand that there is a pain in both sides. It's true, I am biased maybe, and what I build here is a much stronger case for Israel, but regardless, I'm still, if you know that, like, if you learn the history of the Palestinian people, you know that those are people that a lot of, like, even in the Ottoman Empire, and then later, most of them were, like, almost slaves, I would call it, to Arab lords that were put there, or immigrated there, or ran from somewhere else, and were always treated as second-class citizens. They don't have anywhere to go. In Jordan, they're not getting their rights. In Lebanon, they're not getting their rights. In Egypt, they're not getting their rights. They've been, in their point of view, been abused everywhere from all sides. Then you know that you're talking to people, and maybe you don't agree with everything they do, but you understand where the pain comes from. So that's super important. And then, we need to somehow understand that Jerusalem can belong to both places. We need to stop the right of return, and we need to like the idea. And we need to build a solution in which both states maybe will exist in the beginning, and then will drop their borders. I don't know, some kind of years in the future. That's my opinion.
Sounds a lot like biblical prophecy, right? That Jerusalem is this city with open gates that the kings and nations of the world will come into, right? Not to take over, but to rejoice in common humanity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So we should probably wrap this up, because we've been going for like 3 hours now. But a ton of fun talking to you.
Totally.
For those of you who disagree with what's been said here, invite you to come share your voice. We did Palestine last week, and I think more than ever, this is a conversation that needs to happen. And that's what we're about. So thank you for listening to the Almeida Initiative podcast. We will be back next week.